there. Thank you for joining me for this online workshop. What an interesting time period in history we're all living through right now. Well, today's topic is how to teach history to high school students that you're homeschooling. And it's not quite the same as having them sit in a classroom somewhere and have somebody else teach them. So how do you do this? Well, we have to talk first about how history is generally viewed as one of the most boring subjects that you can actually be required to take, right? And you may be wondering, is it possible to do something else? My answer is absolutely yes. Yes, you can change all of that. And what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to show you how to go from having your kids have a reaction to history like, meh, to, really? To, wow. And there are amazing things that they learn in that process. So we're going to have all this and more as we go through this workshop. And if you're ready, let's get started. I'm sure you've heard the proverb, give me a fish and I'll eat today. Teach me to fish and I'll eat for a lifetime. When it comes to the study of history, we tend to hand our kids fish. So here is the Declaration of Independence and Harriet Tubman and World War I and Neil Armstrong, all very recognizable people and events in history. And if our kids study this, they have a momentary taste of that person or event. But just like eating a fish today, the information doesn't really stay with them very long. So what I want to talk to you about is how to teach your kids to fish when it comes to history so that they can learn and discover and remember for a lifetime. That's the plan. Now, as we actually get into talking about how to do history with high schoolers, let me say that students do need some sort of planned out history course. They need to see people and events within the context of that historic moment. And a good history textbook will provide that for you. This is the part that we're all familiar with, right? Reading a textbook or some other history book or listening to audio recordings of history. That's a fish that we hand them. But for many students, if that's the only way they engage with history, it might only last for a brief moment in their memory. But we want more for our kids than that. So how do we do it? In order to really get history into their understanding, they need to engage it in some way, to explore something that interests them about that moment of history, to play with something they just learned, to share it with someone else by teaching or creating. That's part of teaching them how to fish so they can eat for a lifetime. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. As you saw, that was Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, France, a medieval church built in the 1100s. Now, Eric was studying the Middle Ages and became interested in the construction of Notre Dame. He began to explore its architectural style and then decided to create a Minecraft version of this masterpiece. Well, what did Eric learn in this process? Well, he studied this time period in the Middle Ages in a way that made sense to him. And obviously, he learned a lot about the actual structure of Notre Dame. He even learned the shapes of specific building blocks. He created an online design for this building. He learned more about how to work quickly in Minecraft, as this was a massive project. I'm sure you could tell that. He grew in his editing skills, working with video production. He learned more about time management, since he had to get other schoolwork done as well. And he was so motivated as he did this project. It was really satisfying for him. And that's a lot to learn from one moment in history. Have you ever seen all these learning outcomes in a history textbook? Now, here's an essential element that I want you to see. He needed time to explore. This kind of engagement and learning doesn't happen in 1 hour. It requires creative space and free time. And one of the most amazing benefits of homeschooling is that our kids actually have more time than students in other kinds of educational programs because they're at home. They're not waiting in line, not waiting for papers to be handed back, not moving between classes and all of that. All right, let's pause for just a minute and get real. Are you feeling uncomfortable with this whole idea? How on earth are your kids going to find the time to do something like this? And could they do it anyway? Well, let's just deal with the question of time right now. For most of us, we feel this sense of the pace is faster already than we can keep up with. And you may be looking at that project, the Minecraft, and thinking, I cannot add one more thing for my kids to do. And so realistically, I'm not talking about adding one more thing. I'm talking about slowing down the pace. I'm talking about recognizing that real learning takes time. Real learning takes time. When we think that learning is simply reading a book and then being able to answer some questions about what we read, we've really we've dumbed down the idea of learning. That's a short-term memory thing, right? And we'll talk about that more before we finish this workshop. But what I want to point out is that it's not enough to just read it. You have to do it. You have to engage it. You have to take it and interact with it in some way, because when you do that, it starts to, you start to have more questions. It starts to filter new ideas inside of your mind, and you ponder it. And what we're going to see as we look at these various students' projects is that they spent time. They need to have time to be able to spend the time to really learn. And I want to inspire you and encourage you that it's worth it. Again, we're going to talk more about that as we go along. All right, let's get back to it. Not every student does Minecraft or video editing, and that's important to note. Each of our kids is going to come at learning from different ways, depending on their interests and abilities. Let's look at a very different kind of example. Personally, I would never have thought of using a cake to show the amazing changes in transportation invented during the late 1700s and 1800s. But Eden, this artistic cake designer, was studying the Industrial Revolution, and she became intrigued by the different types of transportation that were available. People up till that time had been limited to walking and riding horses or maybe sailing on a ship. But as she learned more about this, she thought it sounded like fun to make a transportation cake. So what did Eden learn in this process? Well, clearly, She learned a lot about the Industrial Revolution and the kinds of transportation that became available in that time period. She pondered the way these kinds of transportation would affect people who would be traveling on the oceans, traveling in the cities, traveling in the rural areas. She also discovered design principles, she had to learn them, that are helpful when trying to do artistic work, especially on a cake. It's real difficult. She learned more about mixing food colors as she tried to get the right look for each invention, and she had to problem solve when things didn't work like she thought they would. But you know what? She had great joy in watching her family dive in and devour her edible art. That's a lot to learn from one moment in history, and a lot of satisfaction, personal satisfaction at the end of it. And though I saw this cake nearly 2 years ago, it made such an impression on me that I still remember it today. Now, here's another essential element that I want you to see. She needed freedom to choose what she wanted to explore and how she wanted to engage it. No history textbook I've ever seen requires a student to make a transportation cake. That was wholly Eden's idea and her hard work to create. One of the most important things you need to know as you teach your kids is that there is freedom in homeschooling. You, as their teacher, can give them freedom to explore, freedom to ponder, freedom to create. And it's not a waste of time, because giving our kids a certain amount of freedom in their learning is one of the key parts of developing self-motivation. You may be thinking that making a cake doesn't seem like a normal intellectual pursuit when it comes to history, and I'd agree with you on that. But the fun thing about this is that Eden is an extraordinary student in every subject. She's amazing. So it's not a matter of her not wanting to put in the effort to really learn something. It's the fact that she played with it. She understood and understands that playing, when you add playfulness and learning, something amazing happens. You know that not only kids, but adults, if we're playing, we will exert a huge amount of energy, won't we? We'll really dig in. We'll really work hard at playing, whatever it is. So when you combine that powerful element of play with learning, something extraordinary happens. Students begin to work in ways that are way beyond what we would have ever imagined. And they learn so much in the process, as we're seeing. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, another way that our high schoolers can learn how to fish when it comes to studying history is to teach others what they've learned. I'm sure that you've heard that one of the best ways to learn something yourself is by teaching it to someone else. So let's look at this example. What an intriguing idea. Teaching younger students about Attila the Hun through creating an activity book for them to play with? Well, James was studying the late Roman Empire and some of the contributing factors to its fall. He found the story of Attila the Hun to be fascinating, which it is, and thought the idea of creating an activity book would be fun. not just for himself, but for his younger siblings too. So what did James learn in this process? Well, first he learned a lot about the details of Attila the Hun's life, where he lived, the monetary system of the Huns, the battles he fought against the Romans. James discovered the geography, the legends, the international travel in that era. That's an odd idea, isn't it? And how treaties were negotiated in the midst of wars. He pondered the different types of activities, educational activities that might be interesting to younger students. He learned more about graphic design and how to create the look for each activity and each page. You notice they were all different. He also gained experience in time management as he had other responsibilities during the days he was creating this book. He worked to solve problems when things didn't go as planned, and he greatly enjoyed sharing the final product with others. Wow. James is now at university studying, I love this, history. His Attila the Hun activity book shows how a high schooler can learn a lot from one moment in history. Are you seeing how rich these experiences are for all of these students? They're digging in, gaining skill and perseverance, developing their creative abilities, and finding great joy and satisfaction in the final product. Now, here's another essential element for you and for me. We need to be a great audience for our kids. As a parent, your first response to your student's attempt of engaging with history or any other kind of creative endeavor is to applaud it, to encourage them, to be their cheerleader. Later, if they need a few edits here or corrections there, you can gently share those. But your kids need you to wholeheartedly enjoy their creative offering. To do this kind of work requires being vulnerable. And if we don't meet them with kindness and appreciation in that moment, they won't feel safe to try again. You know, it can be hard to navigate between being a parent on the one hand and being a teacher on the other hand, especially in these kind of moments when your student has worked hard and they bring something and present it to you and you look at it and you go, there's some editing issues here, or oops, I see some things that need to be corrected, and you're not sure exactly what the right response is. So let me help you with that. The right response in that first initial time, when you've just seen it, you've just received it, you've just read it, you've just listened to it, is to applaud. Your first response is to go, amazing. That was great. Oh, honey, I love what you've done. You share an encouraging word first and let them just kind of take that in and go, wow. And after a time, I don't know, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, maybe 2 hours later, something, but let there be enough time where you say, okay, now something that I noticed, it's not big, but let me show you, this could actually be a little bit better. What do you think? And if you can have a wholehearted response of approval the first time around, what that does is it creates a safe environment for your kids, where it's safe for the artist, it's safe for the journalist, it's safe for the musician, it's safe for the actor, it's safe for whatever to share. We're vulnerable in this moment, whoever we are that have just created something, we're vulnerable, so we need to hear. And your kids need to hear, well done. All right? If you don't see that working for you, I can tell you that a first response of, well, let me correct a few things, that will actually backfire, because eventually, or maybe right away, your kids will say, I'm not going to try anymore. I am not going to be open and vulnerable with these ideas, this exploration. So let's create an environment, okay, where it's safe. And if you're listening to this and you say, oh, oops, I've already not done that, I think it's really okay to go to your kids and say, you know, in the past, I've responded in a way because I thought that was the best way to respond to you, but I apologize. I am sorry. And from now on, my first response to you is going to be to take in the work that you did and the effort that you did. And I'm just going to enjoy it so much. And later we can talk about if there are any corrections that need to be made. If you can tell them that you're sorry, ask for their forgiveness, even depending on how strongly you've corrected them in the past. And then assure them of how you're going to respond in the future, that tentatively they may try again. And you just start to rebuild that environment where it's safe. It's safe to try. It's safe to fail. Do you know, thinking about Thomas Edison and his light bulb, we all know the story, but he failed a number of times. It's close to 1,000 times that he didn't actually have a workable light bulb. But if we create an environment where it's safe to try, even if you fail, and try again, even if you fail, and try again, even if you fail, and you keep having that place where it's okay, let's keep doing this, let's keep trying, that they can come to a point of understanding, especially high school students. That would be harder for younger students to keep trying and trying and trying. They're not as mature yet. But for high school students, there's a maturity that's happening that if they feel like you're still with them, you're still there, you're still on the sidelines going, I'm rooting for you, that they can stay engaged with their project and keep going. It's a relationship issue. And I'll talk about that more in a different workshop. All right, back to it. Now, when it comes to history, how can our kids actually make sense of what they're learning? How can they organize the information so it is accessible in their memories? One obvious answer is by creating a timeline. But for some students, doing a timeline is not very interesting, not very motivating. So encourage them to come up with their own solutions for organizing what they've learned. Let me show you what one student in Australia came up with. I'm not sure this part is obvious from what I just showed you, but Chantel actually created several issues of the History Head magazine, each one devoted to a different person in a different era. This particular issue was focused on Johann Sebastian Bach's historic era, his life, and the beautiful musical compositions he created. Now, what did Chantel learn in this process? Well, first of all, she learned a tremendous amount about the Baroque era, about the challenges of being a musician in that time period, and obviously she learned a lot about Bach. She also discovered many different musical forms and what they sounded like. She pondered which historic details to include and which ones to leave out. That's a skill in structure and layout. That's a difficult task for anyone. She learned to use software on the computer that allowed her to create the look she wanted for her magazine. And she sorted out how to organize the information in a way that made sense to her and to anyone who would read her magazine. And of course, she had a great time doing the work. You can probably tell that. So I know that because she also kept creating those other issues of History Head magazine. Now that's a lot of learning, all in one experience. And by the way, after Chantel graduated from homeschool, she became a professional ballet dancer. All the dedication and perseverance required to become a dancer is visible in her efforts with this magazine. Now here's another essential element for you. She needed a way to practice what she was learning. If we just hear something or read something, it's like being given a fish for a day. We keep talking about this. So our kids need the opportunity to sit with what they've just heard. Sit with it, to discuss it with someone, to journal it, to dramatize it. they can stand up to dramatize it, to sing it, anything that helps them take in the information at a deeper level in the long-term memory area of the brain. Okay, let's stop for just a minute and talk about the difference between short-term memory and long-term memory. Now, when we're talking about students, it's not quite the same as when we're talking about elderly people. I mean, the same concepts, but we want to look at it in a different way than when we were thinking about elderly people. So with students, if they have a short-term memory of the Battle of Waterloo, for instance, that means that they simply read it, tried hard to memorize enough information, 1815, Napoleon lost, and so they can get it right on a test. Now, what happens then is that memory, once they walk away from the test, within probably an hour or a day or two, that memory's gone. It's gone. You say Battle of Waterloo, and they look at you blankly and go, sort of rings a bell, but I don't really remember much about it at all. Meaning nothing. And that actually is how a lot of us who went through normal history classes or normal history textbooks, that's kind of the experience that we had, because we memorized things for the test, but it only went into the short-term memory. And so we don't actually remember it any longer. To actually get it into the long-term memory where it stays long-term, that's what that means. To get it into the long-term memory means you have to do something with it. You cannot simply read it or hear it one time or even two times or even just trying to memorize it real quickly. You have to engage with it. That's absolutely required. But something really interesting, people who have done a lot of study on the brain and what works to get the brain actively putting things into long-term storage is that if you enjoy an activity, if there's something that you do that you laugh or you're having fun with, that actually releases certain chemicals into the body and go into the brain that tell the brain to put that into long-term storage, which I think is a remarkable design feature of the way we've been made, is that we get to remember these wonderful things that goes into long-term storage. And when you consider all the work we're doing and our kids are doing to actually learn in our homeschool, at the end of the day, you want them to remember it, right? So I encourage you to think about this whole idea of how do we get this into the long-term memory? What can we do to play with it? What can we do to engage it? What can we do to interact with it so that this is not just a short-term memory deal? All right? We're almost done. Here we go. So what happens when we encourage our kids to learn history through their interests? Here is one final student project to give you an example of what might happen.
Gothic cathedrals are incredible architectural feats, allowing them to reach celestial heights. But how? The reason is due to one principle, and that is gravity. Each stone is perfectly positioned on top of the other to create a foundation that can hold any amount of weight. This is the pointed arch. It is the first of the Gothic inventions, which takes the gravity's force and redirects it into the ground. But this causes one crucial problem. All of the weight tries to push one key area outwards. If the support were removed, the whole arch would collapse. This is where the second Gothic invention comes into play, the flying buttress. These buttresses would support every arch, allowing the gravity to flow further through it and into the ground because of how much closer it is to the surface. With this method, they were able to reach incredible heights, capturing heavenly light. And now, as the support is removed, the arch stands as the weight is directed into the ground by the buttresses. This really was a magnificent architectural accomplishment.
Isn't this amazing? I've always wondered personally about flying buttresses, and since I teach history online, I've actually spent some time reading about this, but honestly, until Alex shared his video, I never really got it. So, what did Alex learn in this process? He dove down into the physics of the medieval cathedral structure until he gained a comprehension of how the flying buttresses actually worked. And then from there, he pondered how to build a small-scale replica of a flying buttress, considering what kind of material to use and how the pieces would need to fit together. He gained more experience in woodworking and using those electric tools, plus he had to create the pattern for the wood pieces and physically cut them out. As was the case with the other students in this presentation, Alex had to problem solve when things didn't work. He had to sort out how to do the video presentation with all of the editing required. And he had a blast doing this whole project. It's amazing, isn't it? So much learning from one history project. Can you feel the level of Alex's motivation in this? Well, I have one final essential element for you. We need to let our kids experience a deeper level of history through their interests. We've seen a Minecraft project, a transportation cake, an activity book for kids, a history magazine, and a miniature building project. All of these came from ideas that the students had. Ideas that grew in a homeschool environment where there was time and freedom and an appreciative audience. Ideas for organizing and testing what was learned in their studies of history. Now, some of you may have loved this and you're so inspired and you're really glad you watched it. And others who've hung in until this point, you're scratching your head and you're wondering, why on earth would we do all of this work or have our kids spend all this time for history? I mean, let's just get a book, okay? And that's, fair enough. I've heard people say that. But here's something I'd like to give you to think about for just a minute. I've already talked about how much time you're investing and your kids are investing in learning, in their academic pursuit. If you can stretch even just a little bit to try this, to allow a little bit in this direction, if you begin to open the doors for this and give it a fair shot and be an encouragement as your kids try things, I think you're going to discover that they can learn far more than what's normal. All right? If we want an extraordinary outcome, we have to give some extraordinary opportunities. And I think that's what we're all looking for, is an extraordinary outcome with our kids. I want you to be encouraged to create an environment where learning is lauded, education is encouraged, and homeschooling becomes a habit that doesn't end after graduation. To finish us off, I'd like to share with you two students' responses to questions I sent out to some of my current students, to questions I asked them about how they view history, how the experience has been for them, and how they see it making a difference in their own lives. All right. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to share with me. Thank you. When I asked two students to respond to me in questions that I thought might be interesting for you to hear their answers, this is what they wrote. I asked, how has studying history helped you grow in your ability to learn? Alex said, history has opened many areas in which I've been able to improve and learn, particularly research. The most exciting part about history for me is digging through past events and connecting the dots between them. It's a skill I didn't necessarily have to use before. Just that one skill branches out into presentation, explanation, deduction, etc., all of which originated from the study and discovery of history. Abby says, history has given me a deeper spiritual and emotional understanding of the world around me. It has also shown me the importance of having an open mind and a willingness to learn, because there are two sides to every story. Both armies in a war are made up of individuals who have motives and emotions just as heartfelt as those on the opposing side. It has taught me to be aware of reaching past any generalized bias in seeking truth, and not to stick to my own guns and impulsive reactions when faced with a controversial topic. As the Bible is a foundation by which the world could be understood in the light of Christ's power and purpose, so I believe history becomes a lens by which we can begin to form a clearer understanding of God's presence in every circumstance. And then I asked, what value do you personally see in having a basic understanding of history? Alex responded this way. Personally, I can't imagine life without some sort of understanding of history, since history is what the whole world is based upon. To understand the world today, you have to broaden your scope to include history. You cannot separate the past from the present, because the present would not exist if it were not for the past. Every ounce you gather from history will deepen your understanding of the world today. And Abby responded, by having a deep understanding of the past, more specifically God's hand in the past, one can look to the future with a greater certainty of His faithful providence. The Bible is the first and foremost place to turn for God's guidance, and history is a testing ground for God's promise-keeping and an unwavering testament of His faithfulness. With a rich culture and knowledge of history, it inspires one to make their own mark on the world, to leave a legacy. Even those that claim to focus on the future and the advance of humanity while ignoring the past are laying their foundation on previous principles and advances. We must examine our past and present and ask ourselves, on what foundation are we building our future? I am really delighted that you've stayed with me to the end, and I'd like to invite you to visit my website, www.dianawaring.com, for more on history. I have all kinds of resources, online classes, and curriculum for all ages. And including upcoming, I'm working on an American history curriculum. So that's in the future. But I'd love to have you come visit, and feel free to contact us through the website. We would love to help you. Thank you.